All right, good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started today. So as we discussed last week, we're starting a new series titled Your Role in the Body. And I guess I'll go ahead and go over this first. So going over some ground rules before each class. First of all, this class will provide a practical guide to applying your God-given gifts to help others and to effectively serve in the church body. So that's a summary of what this class is going to do. The goal, which is the main part that I want to try to get across every time we're up here and talking, is to stir up action in individuals by using their gifts in unity with the whole body. So again, the purpose of this class is practical application. It's not to just increase our knowledge, though hopefully we will increase in knowledge. But the goal is, how do we take that knowledge and the things that we're learning and actually go out and put that into action? When we talk about gifts in this class, they are defined as the combination of God-given talent and passion. So I know that giftedness or spiritual giftedness can cover many different things in the Bible. Again, as we talked about last week, which I went into all this in more detail last week, there's a conversation to be had about spiritual gifts and miraculous gifts and things like that, but that is not in the scope of this class. This class is talking about, again, gifts as defined by what are you good at and what are the things that you're comfortable doing or the things that you want to do, the things that, again, you're passionate about. What do you desire? And then we're going to look at this through three lenses. First of all, through the church body as a whole. So looking at the church at large, like our congregation specifically. So what does our congregation do with these gifts? Is our congregation utilizing these gifts effectively? Looking at this from a, how can I help other people in their gifts that we notice? How do I encourage them to increase in their gifts and to take more action in their gifts? And also to look at this at the individual level. So you yourself, do you have this gift? Do you not have this gift? If you do have it, how can you start taking more action in it? And then finally, all these gifts, your gifts should be used in love and unity. So if your gifts are not used in love, then they're not used in unity within the body, then your gifts are worthless. And that's what 1 Corinthians chapter 13 is all about. So even if you're great at in context of 1 Corinthians 13, if you are great at speaking in tongues, and that's something that kind of, I guess, was people putting themselves kind of on a pedestal that were able to do that back at that time. But if you do that without love, then you're just making a lot of noise for no good reason. So we need to be mindful of, and we need to celebrate the diversity in our giftedness. And again, I went into this in more detail last week, but the point that I'll say is that all of us are different. All of us have different gifts. It can be really easy sometimes to get annoyed with someone whose gift is different than yours because they don't think the same way that you do. But having those differences is what makes us stronger. And having those differences is where we can fill in some people's strengths and other people's weaknesses, fill in, kind of like a marriage. If you marry someone who's different than you, then together you're much stronger than you are as individuals. And so to be mindful of that, again, to celebrate our differences that we have. I'll go back just a tad because I know that there's a lot of people in here last week that were not in here the week prior. So this is based off a book called Spiritual Giftedness by Doug Hamilton. Stopping on that conclusion slide is not the best, but within the book, there's a test online that you can take to kind of get you started in the right direction, but that's not the only way to figure out what your gifts are, because then you can talk to other people, you can try out the gifts. There's lots of different ways to get to that point. So here, I took the test, and here it is up on the screen. Shocking to no one, teaching and administration are highest, and also shocking to no one, Mercy Giver is the lowest on mine. So I know that I need to do work on Mercy Giver, but when I'm talking through the topics but as we go through this, like you'll see, we're talking about missionary this week and potentially evangelist this week as well. But I'm not as good at those, so I'm going to rely more on what the book says or what other people would say in those gifts because that's not my strength. So, to go all the way back through. One more review real quick. So last week we talked about the body specifically to set this all up. We specifically discussed Romans chapter 12 and 1 Corinthians chapter 12 in great detail. Here are the takeaways that I had from that discussion that people pointed out. First of all of us have gifts and are expected to use them. That was said by Ray, I believe. Our gifts are useful and necessary for the functioning of the body. The unseen gifts might be more impactful. What I mean by that, and this is a point that, one of the biggest points that came out of this when I did the study prior, is that oftentimes the public gifts, so the public-facing gifts, are viewed as more important. So if you're up here from the pulpit and you're teaching or preaching, can be viewed as more important. Or if you're the one, baptizing people, that can be seen as more important. But how many of you would say that you can name the top 5 sermons you've ever heard off the top of your head and tell me exactly what they were about? Because I couldn't do that. I know I've heard sermons that were really good and that made me think about things a different way, but I can't recall them now. But how many of you can recall specific times when someone helped you out when you're in a bad spot? Or somebody that did something really nice for you? Somebody that took food to you after you had a baby? Or somebody who said something really nice to you after a loved one died, something like that. Those are more impactful, in my opinion. And so just because your gift might not be one where you're in front of people and in front of the public and saying all these great things, doesn't mean that your gift is not important and that you cannot make an even bigger impact in that gift than someone else can. Again, gifts should be used in love. One thing that I think we see in 1 Corinthians 12, well, in both of them, is that you need to be humble in your gift. So if you are really good at something, people can see that when you don't have humility, right? And that was a big topic of discussion in those 2 passages because people apparently were not humble in their gift at that time. And then also, don't be afraid to use your gift. Again, whether you think it's unimportant, which is what we just talked about, or if you think that someone is better at it. So, I have this gift, but I know, how many people have been teaching this class before me, right? Ray, Aaron, Mike, Kevin. It's easy sometimes to go, well, I can't do it as well as they can. Why should I be up here? Are people actually going to learn anything from me? But the point is, just because you think someone is better at it doesn't give you a pass to then not utilize that gift. So, all that being said, let's dive in now to apostle, which is the passion of missions. So the listing of the gifts that we're going to go through is in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 11, and also in Romans chapter 12. So Ephesians 4, verse 11, and he gave some as apostles, is how it starts out, and then he starts a list of things. So according to Doug Hamilton's testing results, so basically taking those surveys in a large number and then breaking them out by percentages, roughly 6% of people have this gift. So the Greek word, I'm not a Greek scholar, the Greek word means one who is sent out or a messenger. So in today's context, we would call that person a missionary. There's also discussion over who is an apostle in differentiating between the apostles, and apostles, so messengers. So if we look at 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 23, it says, "As for Titus, he is my partner and fellow worker among you. As for our brothers, they are messengers of the churches, a glory to Christ." And the word messengers there is same as, Aaron can correct me if I'm wrong, same as, very similar to the word apostle. And then also in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 6, "Nor did we seek to honor from people, either from you or from others, though we could have asserted our authority as as apostles of Christ." So in this case, the "we" would refer back to 1 Thessalonians 1, verse 1, which is Paul, Silas, and Timothy when he's talking about "we." And we know that Silas and Timothy were not considered part of the 12 apostles. So, who is a missionary? What is the definition of a missionary? In looking through this, missionary, evangelist, and teacher, to me, are very similar. There's a lot of overlap between them, but the motivations are different. So, a missionary is someone who desires to start congregations where none exist. They facilitate the formation of churches despite obstacles presented by the world. So, I think we're going to get into it just a minute, so I'll save that comment. So if we look in Matthew chapter 28, verses 19 through 20, this is the passage that I think everyone in here was required to memorize from a young age because you heard it so often, probably. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to follow all that I commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. So again, this is, at this time, would have been referencing the 12 or 11 at the time, but showing the apostolic mission to make disciples of all nations. That requires traveling away from where you currently are in order to take out that message of Jesus. Again, we often reference this passage as applicable to us today, even though at that time he was speaking specifically to that group of people. And so we have the obligation, or there is the function of being a missionary, whether it's at an individual level or at a church level. Acts chapter 1, verse 8 says, "But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you shall be my witness both in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and as far as the remotest parts of the earth." Once again, referencing the 12, but showing that they are going to go out from the current location to be witnesses where none existed at that point in time. Mark 16:15, very similar to the passage in Matthew, and he said to them, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation." Another thing about missionaries is that they want to turn the world upside down, and they see the world as a field ripe for harvest. So if we look in Acts chapter 17, verses 1 through 9, it says, "Now when they had traveled through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where there was a synagogue of the Jews. And according to Paul's custom, he visited them, and for 3 Sabbaths reasoned with them from the Scriptures, explaining and giving evidence that the Christ had to suffer and rise from the dead, and saying, 'This Jesus who I am proclaiming to you is the Christ.' And some of them were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, along with a large number of the God-fearing Greeks and a significant number of the leading women. But the Jews, becoming jealous and taking along some wicked men from the marketplace, formed a mob and set the city in uproar, and they attacked the house of Jason and were seeking to bring them out to the people. When they did not find them, they began dragging Jason and some brothers before the city authorities, shouting, 'These men who have upset the world have come here also.' And Jason has welcomed them, and they all act contrary to the decrees of Caesar, saying that there is another king, Jesus. They stirred up the crowd and the city authorities who heard these things. And when they had received a pledge from Jason and the others, they released them." So you could argue that maybe the goal of that mission was not to turn the world upside down. But that's what the gospel message does, especially in areas where it's not currently prevalent. So missionaries, I'm thinking about people that we know that are missionaries, right? Missionaries that we support, kind of the typical missionary. They are not afraid, and they are not afraid to stir it up in other areas. And even if they get their hand slapped, or more than a hand slap, they're not afraid to keep coming back for more. John chapter 4, verse 35, Jesus said to them, "My food is to do the will of him who sent me and accomplish his work. Do you not say, 'There are still 4 months, and then comes the harvest'? Behold, I tell you, raise your eyes and observe the fields, that they are white for the harvest." So Jesus is our model in all gifts. Jesus viewed the world as a field ripe for harvesting, and didn't care about as much about eating in this case as he did about trying to save souls. And those with the missionary gift would be similar to that. Romans chapter 10, verses 14 through 15. How then are they to call on him in whom they have not believed? How are they to believe in him who they have not heard? And how are they to hear without a preacher? But how are they to preach unless they are sent? Just as it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring the good news of good things. So this passage raises a good point. For a new area to be saved, they first have to hear the gospel, right? When we talk about the steps to salvation, it starts with hearing. Well, someone has to be the person to tell that person first. So they can't hear unless someone says it, and no one can be there to say it unless they go to that area. So the best way to spread the gospel to areas in the world in which it is not prevalent is to go there. So, yeah, this is the point I was wanting to get to. So missionaries and evangelists, these are the first two gifts that we're going to talk about. I originally was thinking that we could cover two in a single class period. I think we're probably just only going to be able to get through one. But missionaries are different from evangelists, though there's overlap. So, yeah, evangelists share the good news, which is the gospel, but missionaries have a more holistic approach. So let's back up just a second. So evangelists are more focused on proclaiming this message and winning converts by talking to people, which is a function of being a missionary, right? Like you go out when you're a missionary and you talk to people and you take the gospel message to others. But missionaries have a more holistic approach with the intent to build or plant something that is sustainable. So they establish a new church or a Christian community and they move to a new area and don't necessarily stay on as the permanent minister. So again, when I'm thinking about people who are true missionaries and missionaries that we support, so the Kastners or Philip. So Philip is building something there, right? He has a preaching school where he is teaching people to then go out and spread the message. The Kastners have a school where again, like holistic approach. So building a compound might not be the best term, but a compound where people can come in and be taught how to go out and take the gospel out there, but building a place where they can live and their families can be there for that time. So building a sustainable thing that then once they leave can be again self-sustaining. So signs of maturity for a missionary. First of all, they're visionary. So they're not intimidated by obstacles. Their worldview is colored by Christ and the Bible, and they are risk takers. So in 1 John chapter 2, verse 15, it says, "Do not love the world, nor the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him." Secondly, they are adaptable. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 19 through 23, "For though I am free from all people, I have made myself a slave to all, so that I may gain more. To the Jews I became a Jew, so that I might gain Jews. And to those who are under the law, I became as one under the law, though not being under the law myself, so that I might gain those who are under the law. To those who are without the law, I became as one without the law, though not being without the law of God, but under the law of Christ, so that I might gain those who are without the law. To the weak I became weak, that I might gain the weak. I have become all things to all people, so that I may by all means save some. I do all things for the sake of the gospel, so that I may become a fellow partaker of it." To me, this is just a great example of what a missionary is, for what that Paul is giving us here. How he's like, I don't care what I got to do to reach people, I'm going to do that. So missionaries, in that sense, a mature missionary is adaptable. And then finally, well, not finally, but final in our list, they are non-materialistic. So they usually have modest possessions. They're usually not interested in material gain, and that they know that the Lord will make ends meet. Signs of immaturity in a missionary. They are impulsive. So Doug points out in the book that oftentimes people who are high in missions are low in administration. So in Luke chapter 14, verse 28 says, "For which one of you, when he wants to build a tower, does not first sit down and calculate the cost to see if he has enough to complete it?" So again, the immature missionary will just go out and start trying to do things without thinking through all the details of what it takes to do that, and might end up then failing in that mission work because they did not plan it out ahead of time. Secondly, they are impractical. They set their goals too high, they move too fast, and they do too much. And finally, then they are impatient. So they're impatient with old converts, they're impatient with new converts, and impatient with non-converts. Who are some biblical examples of great missionaries that you can think of? So Elizabeth says Paul? Yeah, do we have microphones? I know, I sprung the question session on everyone. So So Elizabeth has a comment to make.
It's interesting that we're talking about missionaries, and that is our small group noon Bible study through Acts. One of the things that's caught my attention is how long Paul stays in one place, a year, 2, or more. He brings other people in and teaches them as he's teaching people. I don't know you'd say he was impatient or not, but he went to the Jews a number of times and gave them the opportunity to better understand their history of prophecy for the Messiah, and they rejected it. So he went on to the people who would listen, who were receptive, the Gentiles. So he did spend time.
Yes, yeah, he did spend a period of time at each place, but he didn't just, So in line with what we were saying, he didn't just stay there. But yes, he spent enough time there to get them up and going, and then would visit and check back in, and as we know, write letters to all the congregations to perform maintenance, maybe you could say, on those congregations. So Paul's a good example. Paul is, he's the easy example, right? But he's one of my favorite Bible characters, and was the first one I thought of when I asked that question. I think we can see that Paul, prior to his conversion, was more on the immature side, right? He was impulsive, he was impatient, he was stoning people, he was violent, all those things. But then we see his maturity after his conversion, and eventually how he will sit and reason with people and be more patient. Ronnie.
Abraham.
Got a microphone coming.
Abraham.
You got a microphone.
Abraham.
Can you expand on that?
Yeah, Abraham was going back to Genesis. Abraham was considered as the first missionary that was called to bless all the people.
Yep, agreed.
I'm just curious if we consider a missionary moving on from a place where they've planted a new congregation and not sticking around, if that's a criteria for being a missionary, do we have any missionaries now? Because most of the people I see that we support are staying a very long time in one place. The most we have recorded Paul stays somewhere is about 3 years, if I recall correctly. And a number of them, like Philip, is building parachurch institutions, not congregations per se, which is not so much missionary work as it is mercy giving and teaching and administration. Mm-hmm. So I'm just curious about that criterion.
I wouldn't say it's a criteria. I would say that would come off too strong for that. It's more like a general here. Honestly, where it came from more was trying to delineate the differences between missionaries, evangelists. I think, a good missionary or a good Christian in general would have all these traits, right? Would have all these, maybe not have the gifts per se, but should be functioning in those things. So that it was more like trying to delineate between missionary and evangelist, whereas missionary is trying to go out to a place in the world where there is no one, versus an evangelist is more talking to the people that they come across, whether they're going to an area where the Bible is prevalent or not.
Okay, so follow-up question then. Mm-hmm. Not because I'm trying to be difficult. These are distinctions that I'm not clear on myself, so mm-hmm. This is a good opportunity to discuss. So if from 1 Thessalonians we count, was it Timothy or Titus in there?
Timothy.
Okay, if we count Timothy as an apostle based on that, later on in the letters to Timothy, Paul tells him, do the work of an evangelist. And from what we understand, Timothy seems to have been circulating around Western Asia Minor amongst the different congregations there. So at that point, is Timothy doing more the work of an evangelist amongst established Christian communities, or an apostle, or both at the same time, or
I think
neither?
Both.
Has his role changed?
I wouldn't say, that's a good question.
The distinctions are very fine, and I'm not
exactly.
sure when we try to lay things out and give them
that.
hard definitions that sometimes that's less helpful.
Oh, I am in agreement with you. So that's honestly, that was the biggest struggle but the thing I spent the most time on trying to think through was the differences between them. But I think there is a lot of overlap. But I think it gets back to, maybe a better way to word it is the motivation of the person, if that makes sense. So as I said, I think teaching, evangelizing, and missions are very closely related because you're doing all three of those things when you are a missionary. But again, it's the motivation. So high in teaching, I assume you're also high in teaching. It's not necessarily about going to each, for me, it's not about going to each person and talking about the death, burial, and resurrection. And it's not about every time I'm up here talking about the death, burial, and resurrection and trying to save people in the audience and things like that. It's more about looking in the scriptures and going, okay, this is something interesting that I found, and I want to share it with you because I think it has helped me. So to me, that's kind of the teaching. Again, evangelizing and missions are, to me, extremely closely related, but slightly different. So evangelist is more just trying to win converts, more than taking it to an area of the world where it isn't. I think I'm kind of starting to repeat myself over and over. We have several hands in the air now. So.
That's good. Thank you. I guess we'll get to the distinction between preaching and teaching, if any, later on.
So
okay.
I agree. Evangelizing and teaching are closely related as well. There's several comments. Okay, we'll start with David, then Dwayne. How about that?
I'm going to help you out a little bit. Missionary is actually comes from the Latin translation, but it's actually the word for apostle. So missionary and apostle are the same thing. And what they do is actually going to encompass all of that. The word apostle just means somebody who's sent out.
Yeah, so at the very beginning, the part thank you, David, for that connection, because I was going to say that as well. When it was talking about, okay, level set just a little bit. So in the book that I'm basing this off of, he had several passages in which he was talking about how an apostle is simply a missionary, but there's that distinction between the 12 and someone who is a messenger. And of all those, I just chose a couple of passages to relay. And then in one of the passages, again, I do not know Greek, but trusting what the author was saying, he was saying the word and I looked at the Greek word. I did not know the Greek word, but when I hit translate this, it said apostle. So the word messenger in the New American Standard in that passage was the word apostle in Greek, and then the same for when it was talking about, again, Paul, Timothy, and Silas being apostles, so in being a missionary.
I think there's a lot of maturing of missionaries evolving into evangelists. That's kind of the niche that they go. They go around until they find a place that they then want to evangelize at. So it's a 2-for-1 kind of thing, that I start off as a missionary going to different A, B, C, D, different places, and then you hit a place that you're just like, wow, I really want to evangelize to these people, and then you evolve into that. And I think you see that a lot in the apostles and what they do.
There are so many different ways that you can have a mission. I'll say, again, what was written over the top of our, before going out of our church building in Claremont was, you are now entering the mission field. And that just stuck with me. Church camp, if you will, if we want to use the moniker church camp, that's a mission. It's a temporary mission, and yet a temporary mission always has an eternal impact. So I would say that you as Christians, we are going to hopefully mature, but through many different aspects of evangelizing, teaching, preaching, and in the case that you have the ability or blessing to be able to go be part of a mission, that we all have that capacity to do so. It doesn't necessarily, and yes, it means to be sent out. When we get in our cars today, we're being sent out. So if we could just kind of take the minutia and make it macroscopic, that's kind of what all that is.
A lot of the missions that we have helped support. I'm going to use Dale Kastner as the example. He's been in Malawi 10 years. They're getting ready to depart. But what did he do while he was there? He could be looked at as a missionary, but he established a school to where they will develop their own missionaries in-house throughout and send them throughout the country. And that is kind of the model that Bear Valley Preaching School utilizes. And over the numerous years that we've known Bear Valley, Colleen and I, we've helped support numerous missionaries. I think we're getting wrapped up in the terminology. I think we should look more at the message. The message is that we are to share the gospel regardless of where we're at, whether it's a country across the pond or here at home. So
that's a good point that I agree with. I do think the distinctions are important, though, and to delineate between them when we're talking about this. So it seems like we have several more comments to.
Okay. So if we could go back to what Aaron was saying when Paul told Timothy to evangelize. I don't know the story well, but I was curious if since Timothy was already on his mission and Paul was like, hey, don't forget, since you're there, you can also evangelize. So I think that there is a good reason to have the distinction because the words are being translated in different, they're using very different words. Mm-hmm. And I like the distinctions because I like black and white. And so it makes more sense for me, but I understand some people don't. But I do think that in that aspect, it makes sense because Paul was seeing something missing in what Timothy was doing, I guess.
Well, I feel like that we as a church should all be missionaries, taking that word to our friends and everything, but we're not all evangelists. But I do believe that we should all be missionaries just in the way we live sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point.
Okay, so I would think that it would be backwards. I think it'd be we're all evangelists and only some of us are missionaries. Okay.
This is point, counterpoint.
I kind of agree with that, but the people that I feel like I'm being a missionary to, is those people who are lost, that they don't know the word, they don't understand the word. Now, we might be evangelists when we're teaching a class or something, but a missionary, I feel like, is taking the word to someone who does not know the word at all.
Dave, as a follow-up, we're going to move on from this pretty quickly. So
I'm just going to define terms again. Yeah. The word evangelist comes from the Greek word euangelion, which just means to share the good news.
So this is...
Can I say something real quick?
Yeah.
So I talked with my uncle last week when we put my mama in the grave. And I got a lot of more details of what he's been up to. He's down in Chapala, Mexico. I never viewed him as a missionary, but he's planted a church there and he's converting many people. But to me, he's doing the right thing. I don't know whether they call him a missionary or evangelist, but he's given me hope to, that's what we should all be doing, whatever we call it.
So, again, so this is based off of, as Doug is defining the different gifts, he is using the listing from Ephesians chapter 4 and from Romans chapter 12 to go through those different gifts. Again, this is the part that, shockingly, okay, back up for a second. So being high in teaching, I love the details and can sometimes get wrapped up in them. And I think that, but I think that the details are important, right? So this gets back to the whole conversation about that we had at the beginning, right? Doing this in love, and also not being annoyed at someone, although not being annoyed is really easy to say, much more difficult to do. So different people think differently, right? Some of us like the details and want to be like, okay, let's define this specifically. Some people do not like the details and view that whole discussion as meaningless. So, but we have to each have those gifts in order to be most effective. So we need people to say, hey, y'all are getting too wrapped up in those details. let's come back up to the top and breathe and go somewhere else. But sometimes getting into the details is extremely important for going in and trying to delineate these terms. So just a quick, hopefully maybe this is a good teaser. Next week we will be talking about evangelism, and so we'll be discussing more about that in detail, and hopefully we start to see the delineations again. And it comes back from the Greek word that is used in it. So we're going to go ahead and skip that question because, again, the whole point of this class is to spur on action and to getting people to go out and do things, not just to learn. So ideas for if you are strong in the mission giftedness. Go on a foreign mission trip. That's a really easy one, right? See what's involved in learning about the administrative side of missions. So go in and try to be involved in the details of it because mission, as we talked about earlier, according to Doug, people who are high in missions are often low in administration. So go and try to see the administrative parts of it. There's opportunities in Croatia, as we've been taught, as we know. Let's Start Talking is a good mission group to get involved with. Latin American missions. So I've been on 5 mission trips to Honduras. The first one was with Latin American missions, and I looked at their website. They're still operating and doing mission work in Latin America. So if you're just like, man, I just feel this calling, or I really have a need to go do it, just get on the website. Those things are easier today than ever before, and try to get hooked up into a group that does that full time. Join or start a ministry that reaches out to people in the community. Again, this is where evangelism and missions start getting real close together. Let me back up for just a second. I would be remiss if I didn't consistently point out that we have an amazing opportunity here in Manhattan with the university that's located, a mile from here? If that, maybe around a mile from here. Full of people from all over the world, many people. So I work on campus. I talk to the people that I work with about church and about God, and we have those types of conversations within HR guidelines. But we have those conversations, and more people, lots of people there are Christians as well. But there are lots of people who are not Christians. And so we have an opportunity, being this close to campus, if you have this calling, and I could say this about every gift, to go and just walk around campus. Again, it might be more of an evangelist thing to just walk around and start talking to people, but reaching out to people who do not have, who are not Christians. Start raising support for outside mission work. So if there's like I said, I've been to Honduras 5 times, so if that's something that's really important to me, then maybe raising support or giving my support to a mission group that is in that country, or trying to reach out to a church in that country and support them. Again, be active in local mission work. Let's see. Food pantries, homeless shelters, things like that, where you're helping people, but then can also start a conversation with them. Pray for specific mission teams across the world. Again, here within this congregation, we can and do pray frequently for Philip, for the Kastners, for the work that's going on in Croatia. Connect with foreign mission teams and fill their specific needs. So in the book, Doug has a conversation, writes about this group of ladies who is quilting blankets for like an orphanage, and how that was really fulfilling for them. So connect with a foreign mission team and maybe come up with something that's a little different, but a way that you can help, even if you don't have the money to go overseas or do those types of things, but you feel passionate about that. How can you get involved in a way that's a little bit different that will help fulfill that need that they have, and also help you in your passion? Go on a domestic mission trip. So there are places in the U.S. where the Bible may not be as prevalent. So seek out some of those places. Again, then it's not going overseas and getting a passport and doing all those fun things. So the book is written by, again, Doug Hamilton, who is an evangelist. I think he probably puts door knocking on everything. So, but you can go and do those. And a door knocking campaign for me is terrifying. But for people who like to get out and talk to people about about the death, burial, and resurrection, those types of things. That's something that's right in line with them. So, 3.5 minutes. What are some other ideas that you all have for someone who has the gift of missions? If you were to try to help them, what would you say?
You said you were terrified of door knocking.
Yeah.
I've tried to do it, and it is terrifying. And everybody that we knocked on the doors thought we were Mormons or Seventh-day Adventists or whatever it is. And they didn't even want to open their door to us. So it was a little difficult. We did it.
So what is helpful, I think, just to get everybody's feet wet would be to visit other congregations. They are established. Some of them are very small. And what you do is you see what's going on. You get a flavor, if you will, for how they function as part of the body of Christ. And as you do that, you are encouraging them. There's several here. Salina I got to visit last week, and my cousin's one of the elders, but it was very encouraging to us and to them to go visit them. Now, that may not seem like a mission trip, but it gets you out of this particular congregation. JC, you could go there. It's quite small. You can go all over. Was it Scott City? So if you want to do something and start different or just start something to go help, you tell them where you're from, you tell them where you worship, and just go to other congregations, and that'll give you kind of a flavor of what it is to, I mean, if you go to Missouri, I mean, that's a different country, isn't it? So you go to a church there. I'm just saying, that's a good way to just start doing something different.
Thank you, Hans. Okay, last thing. So if we're viewing this through the three lenses, the church body as a whole, this maybe is not hand in the air. We need to answer this question, but a question that we need to do some reflection on. Is this church active in missions? How would you rate our passion for missions? If we're not doing a good enough job, how can we do this in a better way? Secondly, helping others. When we're going through this, does this fit someone that you know, the gift of missions? Does this fit someone in this congregation? If so, how can you approach them about that and encourage them in their gift? Finally, self-assessment. Does this definitely describe you, somewhat describe you, or not describe you at all? And if it does describe you, how can you become more active in your gift? Again, there's the test online. There's a test as you go throughout the book, and basically the number of points you put up, a rating based on that last question, then will lead to where your gifts are. So lastly, as each one of us has received a special gift, employ it in serving one another as good stewards of the multifaceted grace of God. Whoever speaks is to do so as one who is speaking actual words of God. Whoever serves is to do so as one who is serving by the strength which God supplies, so that in all things God may be glorified through Jesus Christ, to whom belongs the glory and dominion forever and ever. Amen. It says 10:15. I thought the bell was supposed to go off. So it's a little anticlimactic there, but there you go. All right. Thank you, everyone, for your participation, and we will discuss this again next week.